Imagine the Caribbean Sea. Calm waters, a small fiberglass boat cutting across at a high speed. On board, 11 men, bags of narcotics, and weapons. They just might think they're invisible. Just another drug run. But overhead, a U.S. aircraft is tracking them. In seconds, the calm is shattered. A missile drops, streaking toward the boat. A flash, a roar, and the vessel is obliterated. 11 dead. These weren't just drug traffickers. Washington says they were members of Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan gang newly designated as a foreign terrorist organization. This wasn't an arrest. This was a military strike. So what does a foreign terrorist organization designation mean? What can the U.S. government do with that? Well, let's find out. Hey everybody, welcome to Midweek Sitrep, your bi-weekly briefing on what's happening in the world of national security. My name is Jerry Fowler, and I'm your host. Every other week, I give you the context you need to see what's really going on, so you can stay mission-focused. Today's story isn't just about a boat being blown out of the water. It's about why the U.S. could do it. We're breaking down what an FTO designation actually is, how it's been used historically, and why the Trump administration applied it to a Venezuelan cartel. Because when a cartel gets labeled like Al-Qaeda, the rules of the game have changed overnight. What is an FTO? Well, it's a foreign terrorist organization designation, and it comes from a 1996 law, the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act. It gives the Secretary of State the power to label foreign groups as terrorists if they threaten U.S. nationals or U.S. national security. So once that label is applied, it means several things. One, it's a federal crime for anyone under U.S. jurisdiction to support them. Two, their assets in U.S. banks are frozen. And three, their members can be barred from entry or deported from the United States. The FTO list is Washington's blacklist for the world. Once you're on it, you're radioactive. Traditionally, this authority has been used for groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the FARC insurgency in Colombia. These were ideologically motivated groups, insurgents, or terrorist movements waging organized campaigns of violence. It has not been used for street gangs. It has not been used for drug cartels. For nearly 30 years, the FTO tool was aimed at terrorists with ideology, not traffickers with speedboats. So where does this power come from? The authority sits in Section 219 of the Immigration and Nationality Act, added by the 1996 Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act. It says that the Secretary of State may designate an organization as a foreign terrorist organization if three conditions are met. One, the group is foreign. Two, the group engages in terrorist activity or retains the capability and intent to engage in terrorist activity. And three, the group's activity threatens the security of U.S. nationals or the national security of the United States. That's the legal test. And once those boxes are checked, the designation isn't just symbolic. It carries serious consequences. Material support becomes a federal crime, U.S. banks have to block assets, and immigration law bars members from entry. It takes just three findings: foreign, terrorist activity, and threat to U.S. national security for the Secretary of State to put an organization on America's terror list. This wasn't the first time that Tren de Aragua caught Washington's attention. In July 2024, under the Biden administration, the Treasury Department sanctioned Tren de Aragua as a significant transnational criminal organization. That move froze assets under U.S. jurisdiction and barred Americans from doing business with them. Treasury officials said that the group was involved in human smuggling, gender-based violence, money laundering, and drug trafficking. Brian Nelson, the Treasury's top sanctions official, explained the rationale. Quote, "We will deploy all tools and authorities against organizations like Tren de Aragua that prey on vulnerable populations to generate revenue, engage in a range of criminal activities across borders, and abuse the U.S. financial system." Then came January 2025. President Trump signed an executive order extending terrorism powers directly to cartels and transnational criminal groups. The executive order declared that such organizations pose an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States. It directed the Secretary of State, working with Treasury and Justice, to designate them as foreign terrorist organizations or specially designated global terrorists. The stated purpose: to dismantle the infrastructure of violent cartels and cut off their access to global finance and safe havens. Finally, on February 20th, 2025, the State Department formally designated Tren de Aragua as both a foreign terrorist organization and a specially designated global terrorist. That listing was published on the Federal Register, putting the Venezuelan gang in the same legal category as Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Now that timeline set the stage. By the time of the September strike, Washington had both the statutory authority from the 1996 law and the expanded powers from the executive order. The executive order made it clear: in the eyes of Washington, cartels aren't just criminals anymore. They're national security threats. And Biden's team put Tren de Aragua on the sanctions list. Trump's team took it further, moving them onto the terror list, and then taking the shot. Let's talk about that shot. On September 2nd, U.S. forces struck a small vessel in the southern Caribbean. The Pentagon said it was positively identified as a Tren de Aragua narcotics boat. President Trump put it bluntly: "We literally shot out a boat. 11 Tren de Aragua narco-terrorists. Beware." Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth followed: "It won't stop with just this strike. Anyone trafficking under this banner will face the same fate." Now U.S. forces have tangled with drug traffickers before. The Coast Guard has chased go-fast boats, fired warning shots, even sunk vessels that opened fire. But this was different. No boarding, no arrests, no warning shots, just a missile. Now here's something important to clear up. Designating a group as a foreign terrorist organization doesn't automatically make them enemy combatants. And it doesn't itself authorize military strikes. The law is a law enforcement and financial tool. It criminalizes support, freezes assets, and blocks visas. So where does the power to strike come from? Administrations combine the designation with other authorities, such as counterterrorism authorities, like the 2001 authorization of use of military force, if they can argue that the group fits. Article 2 of the Constitution, which gives the president power to act in defense of U.S. national security. And in this case, a January 2025 executive order that framed cartels as a national security threat. The FTO label doesn't authorize missiles itself, but once it's applied, it gives Washington the footing to argue that counterterrorism powers and the president's own authority can. So why do you think Tren de Aragua was designated? Why did Washington make that call? Well, officials laid out several reasons. The first, the scope of criminal activity. Tren de Aragua is described as more than a gang. It's a network tied to drug trafficking, human smuggling, extortion, and even forced sexual exploitation. 2, its regional reach. What started in Venezuelan prisons has spread across Latin America, exploiting migration routes and touching communities as far north as the U.S. border. 3. National security framing. In January 2025, the administration issued an executive order marking cartels eligible for FTO designation. Secretary of State Marco Rubio explained, "It's no longer a law enforcement issue. It becomes a national security issue." 4. Targeting leadership. Treasury also sanctioned its leaders, labeling them specially designated global terrorists. And 5. The stated purpose. The administration framed the campaign as one to dismantle Tren de Aragua and disrupt their campaign of violence across the region. Washington's argument was simple. This isn't just a gang anymore. It's a transnational threat. Here's the real shift. Military action against traffickers isn't new. The Coast Guard has fired on smugglers before. U.S. aircrafts have tracked drug planes, but those were law enforcement missions with military support. This was different. By leaning on a foreign terrorist organization designation, Washington crossed into new ground. It applied a counterterrorism tool, one built for groups like Al-Qaeda, to a cartel. That sets a precedent. Organized crime can be treated with the same authorities once reserved for insurgents. Supporters argue it was overdue. They say Tren de Aragua isn't just a gang. It's a violent network of smuggling people, running drugs, and terrorizing communities. In their view, law enforcement hasn't worked. Sanctions haven't deterred them, and treating them as terrorists was the only way to stop them. Now, critics push back. They argue the FTO law was never written to authorize missile strikes, only financial and legal penalties. Using it this way, they say, stretches the law, sidesteps Congress, and risks diplomatic fallout if every cartel can be labeled as a terrorist group. That's the debate. Is this a necessary evolution in how the U.S. fights cartels, or an overreach that sets a dangerous precedent? Supporters say that Tren de Aragua's terror had to be stopped. Critics say this stretches the law too far. Either way, the strike marks a turning point. This doesn't stop with Venezuela. Once a cartel is branded as a terrorist group, the impact ripples far beyond the Caribbean. Banks in Europe, shipping firms in Panama, insurers in London, even aid groups working along migration routes. All of them can find themselves exposed to the same liability as if they had done business with Al-Qaeda. Now, how is this different from being sanctioned? Sanctions freeze assets and bar transactions, but they're ultimately financial penalties. A foreign terrorist organization designation goes further. It makes even providing support a federal crime. That means a bank handling a transaction, a logistics company moving a shipment, or even a charity unknowingly channeling resources can face terrorism charges, not just regulatory fines. That shift pulls the fight from local crime into global compliance. It forces diplomats, financial regulators, and international partners to engage. It means humanitarian and development organizations must navigate the same restrictions that surround groups like Hezbollah or Al-Shabaab. This is how a gang that started in a Venezuelan prison yard ends up on the same legal footing as America's most dangerous terrorist adversaries. Sanctions freeze your money. An FTO label makes touching you a crime. That's the difference. And it turns a cartel into a global problem. So what does a blown-up boat in the Caribbean really tell us? It shows the U.S. is applying its most powerful counterterrorism authorities in a new way. It shows the boundary between counterterrorism and counternarcotics is shifting. And it shows that America's legal tools, sanctions, designations, authorities aren't just paperwork. They can become weapons in the night. And that's the bigger point. This strike wasn't just about one boat in the Caribbean. It was about how the U.S. defines its enemies and which tools it's willing to use. By designating a cartel as a terrorist group, the Trump administration showed it's willing to stretch old authorities in new ways to get results. We've seen this playbook before. Tariffs used as a national security tool, investment reviews reshaped into national security screen, and now FTO designations applied to cartels. Different issues, same theme. Everything is national security. It's a reminder that in today's world, the boundaries are blurring. Law enforcement, trade, finance, counterterrorism, they all sit on the same chessboard, and Washington is willing to move the pieces in ways that surprise allies, critics, and adversaries alike. From tariffs to terrorism designations, the Trump administration has one message. If it touches America's security, it's fair game. That's it for today's Midweek Sitrep. If this episode got you thinking, don't let the conversation stop here. Head over to the Insider Brief on Substack and subscribe. It's where we dig deeper, answer your questions, and preview what's next. We're also on YouTube, where you'll find short clips, interviews, and bonus content. Make sure to subscribe there if you haven't already. And if you want to support the show, go to everythingisnationalsecurity.com and check out our merch. Every shirt and hat helps keep Midweek Sitrep independent and growing. Subscribe, share, and stay sharp. I'm Jerry Fowler, and remember, everything is national security. See you next time. Midweek Sitrep with Jerry Fowler is an independent production of OpScent Media Group, LLC. The information provided in this podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or professional advice. Listeners should consult with a qualified professional before making any decisions based upon the content discussed. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host, Jerry Fowler, and any guest, and do not reflect the official policy, position, or endorsement of any current or former employer, client, government agency, military organization, educational institution, or any other entity for which the host, Jerry Fowler, may be affiliated. Mention of a company, product, or service does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation. Any references are provided for informational purposes only. This podcast does not disclose any classified, proprietary, or confidential information. All discussions are based upon publicly available information and personal expertise. Everything's national security. OpScent Media Group, LLC.